thank you all for coming to this little talk and to the organizers of this conference. I'm enjoying it very much. It's super exciting. And as the topic of the whole conference is deception, I decided to deceive you a bit and promise a talk on Voynich when I'm actually going to be talking about computational linguistics, mostly. But the reason for this is that AI is right now super exciting field, and I'm not sure if you're watching the news, but especially in the last months, there really every day I wake up to a new post, a new feed about what new thing thought impossible a couple of weeks ago or a couple of years ago is now like one click away in my phone. So yes, so let's then jump into the Voynich manuscript. It works. So I think that the machine learning is also sort of right now the right time to embrace it and welcome it among the dark arts, because we moved from the point of having basically binary decision trees where we could trace back the reason why certain things are the way they are into having complex mathematical models where we sort of understand the mathematics behind it, but we're still like, we cannot really imagine it in our minds anymore. And we got to a point where a couple of weeks ago, I read a freshly published paper which basically claims that they don't know why it works, it just works. So there is no mathematical explanation behind why a certain reduction actually worked. So that's why let's take a look at the field. So at first, I'm gonna say some basics about the Voynich manuscript, which probably most of the people here are quite familiar with. Then we're going to get a crash course into computational linguistics. And at the very end, we're going to skim through a couple of papers published in the recent years on Voynich and basically why they failed and what is the possibility for the future there. So there is a little obligatory slide about myself. So I write a blog about technology and esoteric and everything weird. I'm a CTO of imaginary startup Hermetechnics Inc, which is dealing with this technological and AI stuff in regards to occultism. I'm a machine learning engineer for an actual real company in real life. And I created an AI tarot deck, and I'm running a small Gnostic technology coven. So pretty much everything is based in the digital space to some extent. So this is the Voynich manuscript. It's 240 handwritten pages, feature these beautiful, colorful illustrations. It's carbon dated to roughly 15th century, but we don't know what's the purpose of it. We don't know what's the language, we don't know who wrote it, we don't know the cipher, and we don't know the purpose of it. So basically there is a big question mark about this little book, and it's also considered one of the most important unsolved ciphers by now. So there are some hints in the content of the manuscript what it could be dealing about, and those are the illustrations. And we can see they could be divided into roughly 6 categories, 8 more or less. So one of them is dealing with plants and botanical illustrations. Then we have something which could be cosmological illustrations. Then we have astronomical / astrological / zodiacal illustrations there. We have something what appears to be pharmacological illustrations. It features these comfy-looking bathing ladies, and there are also a lot of pages covered just in this text, which is in a cipher, which those are not real letters. So what we know about the cipher itself. So at this point, we can be pretty sure that it's not a simple substitution cipher, meaning each glyph is not a letter in any of the natural, exotic, or lost languages we are aware of. So there are some papers, like many theories and different evidence on complex substitution, transposition cipher, abjad, or previously mentioned stego. All of these are pretty open, and all of them have some evidence, but nobody up to date managed to really prove any of these theories. Question about the purpose of the manuscript. So some people claim it could be alchemical manual, it could be some botanical textbook. Then there are, of course, more out there theories about it containing secrets given to Jesus by Judas, or of course there are links to the Book of Enoch, or it could all be some sort of medieval hoax. And there is a general air of aliens of every shape and kind regarding Voynich, which you can always stumble upon when you try to do any sort of in-depth research or even a shallow research, honestly. So interestingly, this image is generated by an AI. So I just typed in Voynich manuscript handed over to humans by aliens. So now you get it there. So this is the timeline of the manuscript, and we're gonna jump, like fast forward the first 500 years and jump straight into the 30s. Because that's the time when the first interest in machine translation began. There were some prototypes in the Soviet Union which were never built, but in the 60s in the US, at the height of the Cold War, it basically became a very lucrative topic, being able to translate intercepted messages from the Soviets. And IBM built the first translator control panel, you can see there, which was able to translate 60 messages from English or from Russian to English, which basically started the whole field of computational linguistics because it ensured rich funding into this research. So here we can see what happened afterwards. So we had several maybe like paradigm shifts which happened in the field. All of it mostly correlates with the computational power which was available at the time. So the first, I'm just going to really quickly run through this because it sort of makes sense with what is happening right now to see it in contrast. So it all started with trying to imitate the actual interpreters, right? So we would have two dictionaries between two different languages and a set of rules written by linguists which basically says how to translate it. This all was super labor intensive for the people writing these rules and for people attempting the translations, and the quality wasn't really that good and it wasn't versatile at all. So with a sort of rise of some computational power available, we were able to switch into statistical machine translation. This means that we take two large corpus of texts translated from, let's say, English into Russian, and we let the machine find the translation between these two texts, assuming that those are identical texts. So this helps us get a little bit better quality of translation, but it still requires this step of having text written in one language and in the other one, and knowing the actual translation. Now, everything very dramatically changed around 2016, 14, sometime then, when this paper about the style transferred through StyleGun was first published. And you can see there were these apps all around the internet at the time where you could take your picture and some style on the top of it, and you're gonna get this. This is not an overlay of the two images, right? The one image is processed through the other to contain and be painted in the same style. So this means one very important thing, that the AI was able at this point to distinguish from each other the style of a painting and the content of the painting. Now, this is super relevant when we think about language, because we can think of the underlying content of the text as the content, and the style can be viewed as the language we use to communicate this content. So now, when we switch it into the language, so when we think about certain words and certain meanings, like, for example, what is a dog? We would think of a set of features, like it's a mammal, it's my favorite animal, it has wiggly tail, fluffy ears, and so on and so on. And this would allow us to be able to distinguish that the dog, which hand painted with a pencil or this oil painting, it's still a dog, no matter how different the images are from each other. Now, what actually the machine learning does is that it is able to extract these features from things. Those are not going to be semantically meaningful as they are for humans. So it's not going to be has tail, but it's going to be this 100-dimensional or some dimensional matrix. It's a mathematical vector. And this thing basically mathematically describes the meaning of a word. And this whole is based on algorithm, which is based on the assumption that context of the word in the text encodes its meaning in some meaningful way. So we are basically at a point where we are able to give machine, let's say, all of the internet or some book, and the algorithm will do the magic of finding the features and will be able to map the words in this mathematical space. So the things which are close to each other in meaning will be close to each other in this space. So as you can see, for example, there, the kitchen, sink, bathroom, table, they would all naturally find its place close to each other in this space of meanings. Now, there is one really, really interesting feature there, which I just wanted to mention because I find it completely mind-blowing, and that's that you can operate with meanings inside of this space mathematically, right? You can take king and add a word female to it, and you're gonna get a word for queen. So you can really subtract and add words with each other, which is really beautiful, I think. So there are many relations in this space like this. So just a few to demonstrate. There is this male-female relation, but also there is this verb-tense relation. So there is a mathematical object you can add to a verb in this space, and you're gonna get a different tense, which, like, keep in mind that nobody gave any grammatical rules to this system. This is all purely found in mathematical relations of this space. So this gives us basically this framework where we have some continuous space of meanings, which is this mathematical space which we are operating on. Several hundred dimensions could be. And we poked holes into this continuous space of meanings with our words, right? So we've got these tiny speckles inside of this huge mess, which are our language. And this I think is a really beautiful framework to think about it. And I could now go on about the theory of, like, what is this space? Do we share this space? Does this space really exist? What is, like, the ontological quality of we could go down many rabbit holes, but I would just pick two small ideas there. And that's that, for example, between every 2 points in this space, we've got a continuous space of meanings in between. We don't have words for them, but the space is there. So this really allows us to play with the language and think about things like, those meanings are there, right? We can just create the words and play around. And the same is like the fractal quality of this space. So the more we get to know certain area, the more dots we make in this area, the better we understand this area. And it still means that between every those 2 points, even in these dense areas, there is still an infinite amount of things we can input there further. So, yes. And now back to this translation. So what this actually means for the translation is that we can build one universe based on, let's say, English language, and then completely separately build a universe in Japanese language. We don't need to have any sort of translation between them, but as we assume that the underlying space there is some sort of universe of human meanings, of human consciousness, we can map them to each other without having any direct translation. So you can probably see what would this mean for Voynich. We could just create a map like this and try to map it onto English language without having the translation. So, and this is actually how the Google Translate you have right now in your pocket works currently. So let's now go back to the Voynich. And you probably see every year there pops up a new article about the freaky 100-year-old manuscript being finally cracked by AI. And it's basically not true. So we can take a look why. So there are some problems with translating of these lost languages. There's been some success. We managed to translate the Linear B and some other old languages which already were translated previously. It worked. But the problems, there are two problems. One are the small data sets. When we build this map for English, we usually use all of the scrapable internet, which is like terabytes of text data, versus in many lost languages, all we have is one book or one plate like this. So the other one is also connected to the volume of the data. It's about the content of the data. If you have something very specific, you can imagine that that's just a subspace of the whole universe, which is not that easy to map back onto the whole thing. So I'm just gonna go through a couple of papers because I think they have some very interesting insights. So someone tried to do exactly the thing with the embeddings, with the universe here. And you can see to the sort of flattening of the space on the right. And there is one very interesting insight, and that's, you can see that there are two clusters. So that's a very good argument for assuming that Voynich is written in two separate languages. There is also this small zoom in into that space on the right, which shows these transliterations of the characters on the left, which are written by the stars. So this clustering sort of implies that it actually succeeded because things which are near the star pictures are close to each other in this space because they probably mean something very similar. But it didn't help us to get any closer to the actual meanings. Then there was another paper which tried to do like statistical analysis on the glyphs in the pages. And you can again see this is the split between the two assumed languages of the Voynich. And we can see that they are separate. So it probably really are two separate languages. This paper here was attempting also the same type of clustering. They found, again, a lot of morphological similarities, functions, like basically they found out that it is a real language, but we couldn't really get any closer to actually deciphering it. They tried to do this mapping of the universes. As you can see up there, Muse is the algorithm to sort of try and align them. I think red is Voynich and green would be Latin, but you can see that the distances, it just doesn't align very well. The problem could be either the very specific nature of the content of Voynich, or it could be the fact that it's not Latin, or it's yeah. So yes, so this was the last paper which sort of created a lot of the headlines there, because it claims to actually have the first sentence of Voynich deciphered. They made a lot of assumptions here. So they assume that the letters within each word are anagrammed, meaning that they are probably many people familiar with Kabbalah, but they're like mixed up within the word, within the words, yeah, the letters. They also ran some analysis on different languages, and Hebrew showed up as the most probable actual underlying language. So they found that this opening sequence maps to, after they ran a lot of different random anagrams, you know, basically throwing a dice often enough so you actually get something which appears like a sentence with certain words in it. It's not grammatically correct, and it translates roughly to, she made recommendations to the priest, men of the house, and me and people. Whether this is sort of the monkey on a typewriter who just got the right answer, who just got some answer after trying enough many times, or whether this really could be something into it, I will leave to you to decide. But my opinion there would be that I wouldn't dare to say that AI would never crack Voynich, because I did this claim several times in the past, and every time I was wrong about anything. So yeah, I think that the research in this area could really show some results soon. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, yes.
I'm curious why, if it was known to have come from Czech Republic, why they didn't analyze the Czech language and have they?
Well, they haven't, in that one paper, they didn't put it in the ranking. And basically, I think that the reason why it fell on Hebrew is that if you're comparing fixed amount of languages, one of them will be first, right? It doesn't mean that's the correct one. So, yeah, I'm not really familiar with that much deciphering, which happened in those 500 years before, right? People definitely tried Czech, but not with the computational linguistic stuff, as far as I know. Any other questions? Yes?
Actually, not concerning Voynich, but stuff you talked before. I was interested in AI, like creating like a logical language. And I guess, if I understood you right, that language also contains words we don't actually have, but like just in characteristics, like this minus female, this, and stuff. Are there any new words we hadn't thought of, where we don't have anything in our language but is suggested by AI might be good? And as we probably know, we in Germany have the trouble with a gender neutral pronouns and stuff. We don't have any. Might AI help in that?
Well, the problem is that our words are basically labels on this mathematical space. So the point in between would exist mathematically, there would exist the meaning, but we still have to create the label for it. And if we know what the meaning should be, we don't need an AI to tell us that we need something which is between he and she, you know.
Are there meanings we didn't know about, and AI suggested maybe you could use a word for that? You know, like maybe something nobody has ever thought about, but the AI said there's actually something.
I'm not really aware that someone asked AI this, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have chance in very, very near future to have this sort of discussion with it. Yes?
So, I know some researchers who've been doing work on identifying provenance of paintings through deep learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if anybody's sort of bypassed the textual base of the Voynich manuscript and sort of looked at the imagery to try to reverse engineer where those came from, to try to, I don't know, do some sleuthing on the image back end before it happened in text.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of anyone doing this. I'm not sure if there is some problem with data. Maybe you know, like you need to do a lot of work to actually like remove all the noise, all the background. And from most of the papers I've seen, half of them were school projects of someone. You know, it seems that there really isn't that much funding in the sort of high-end AI industry to decipher Voynich. So yeah, that's from what I've seen. Yep.
So, Karin, what would be the indications from AI that a manuscript would be like asemic, like the Codex Seraphionus or something like that. How would it be possible, or is it possible for AI to get indications that something is async?
So I think that this paper, which did the morphological analysis of the language, is sort of proving that it actually has semantic meaning. Because, like, of course, someone could create a complete gibberish, but then you're asking whether, you know, it's a fuzzy area, whether, you know, Jabberwocky actually does mean something or doesn't, if it's grammatically correct. So it would have some mapping probably to human language.
We've got about 5 minutes, so
Oh.
lots of potential for questions. What other questions do we have for Karin?
Yes?
It's not about voyage, it's more about your other work.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing Gnostic and magical thinking into contemporary social environments, and particularly how you think about, let's just take GPT-3 and talk about the use of GPT-3 in an oracular, divinatory, or occult manner, how you see people using it, what the potentials are. But particularly for me is this interesting question of agency.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the interesting things that you take Pharmaco AI, which is this kind of dialogue with
Mm-hmm.
GPT and has some oracular character to it. There are parts of it that I find as a reader uncanny in the sense that I cannot help but project a kind of agency. We've seen this already with the Google engineer and Christian Lewin. But then as practitioners who are open to the idea of agency being all over the place, maybe within fictional constructs and it's a kind of playful category, it raises an interesting kind of opportunity and also sort of charged question of how we think about agency in terms of the magical potential of these, at least these kinds of speech generators. So I know there's a lot of ideas and stuff, but I think it's clear that you're thinking about these things.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that from the oracular perspective, it really makes perfect sense, right? You can, basically, there is no better deep dive into subconscious of humanity than something which saw all of the human internet, right? That's basically the most of us which exist in textual form out there. But regarding the agency of the network, I think that it's very sort of deceptive when it comes to language, because like we are very used to the fact that whoever uses language has agency, but it doesn't mean that we have the same cognitive abilities as, let's say, an electric lawnmower which does the same job as me, right? We can work well with language, but it doesn't mean that, let's say, we're conscious or we're sentient. We are, they are not, probably, at this point. So, yeah, I think this is still a very open question, and honestly, I've played a lot with, I'm actually working with language, so that's like my domain, and I'm very skeptical about these current claims about the sentience. Like, I had my discussions with the GPT-3, and I know that it's sort of like back and forth to squeeze what you want out of it to get good results. So, yeah, I think that's a big illusion that just, like, we're so susceptible to fall for the trick of language because nobody ever fooled us before with language, right? Everyone, it was always someone writing before or talking before who had agency. So we can't really tell these two things apart when it's just machine generating it. So, yeah. But I'm not saying no that it's gonna happen soon, so I'm ready. Yes?
I have a really bizarre question. What I'd like to know is the investigation of text and language and AI and expanding all of these areas to see what's not visible. Have you found it's a sense of your own kind of creative process? Have you ever had an expansion of consciousness as a result of your own investigation?
Oh, Definitely. I mean, we've got this small group on Discord who are like sort of discussing these things quite often, because we've got painters there and writers who, like, all of us feel in many ways very threatened with what's happening, right? Because you can really get an artwork which would be meticulously painted in like weeks' work done by Midjourney on, like, of course it's a type of skill, but it's a different type of skill than what we're used to in image generation and in text generation as well. So it really definitely made me question what's the thing I give into art when I create and when I sort of attempt to do something. What is the thing which cannot be replaced by an AI? So it really changes, because quite often when I write and sort of fiction and I get stuck, I just ask GPT-3 what they think, right? And I get some results. I'm not gonna use those sentences, but like, you know, this sort of generation of ideas and generation of images and a lot of data, that's not what makes art. That's not what makes human experience worthwhile, in my opinion. So it definitely is challenging from that perspective for me, the sort of find what connects these things. Yeah.